This is a pretty huge topic in general, and we only have about 30 minutes or so to go through it, but I have a lot of demos that we're going to take a look at, and it's to give you a feel about how you can get started using PowerShell together with Intune or Microsoft Endpoint Manager in general. Because as me, who coming from a configuration manager background, I was doing a lot of things in configuration manager with PowerShell and stuff to make my life easier as an administrator. But then a couple of years ago, when I started turning into more and more working with Intune and that kind of stuff, I was a little bit lost at first because I didn't really know how can I make this easier for myself. I know Microsoft is always introducing new stuff that will help me. But I wasn't sure how to make my life just easier. So let's jump to the next slide. Just a short introduction. My name is Timmy Andersson. I'm a senior consultant working at CT Global. So I'm working together with Kent, and I'm on the enterprise client management team. I'm also a Microsoft MVP within the enterprise and mobility suite. And that's about it. Next thing. I think before we even get started and talking about PowerShell, we need to understand a little bit, what are we actually doing when we are interacting with Graph API? Because all of us are doing it if we are using the Intune console, or the device management console, or the Azure portal. We're always interacting with Graph API, but through a web browser. So to explain a little bit about the workflow on how it works, this is a really great illustration that we have, for example, portal.azure.com. And within portal.azure.com, we have Microsoft Intune and we have Azure Active Directory. And in there, we can do our device compliance, we can do our device configuration, and all the kind of stuff that we can do within the product. And whatever we do from the portal, we're always interacting with Graph API. And Graph API is a pretty huge thing, and there is not just one API. Behind the scenes, there are actually dozens, hundreds of different APIs that Microsoft is managing. But for us, as the users of these services, we're only interacting to what we say Microsoft Graph API. So what happens is that we do something in the portal or in the console, that request gets sent to the Microsoft Graph, and that internally on Microsoft end, then that's provided out to policy providers, application providers, and all the backend stuff that Microsoft is doing for us that make stuff happen pretty much. And this is true for pretty much all the cloud services. There are not all the cloud services that we can interact with in the way we can do with Intune today, but hopefully that's something that will be possible in the future. But I hope this illustration here gives you a little bit of insight on how the communication flow is actually going, that we are always interacting with Graph API, even though we don't know it. And we're just going to leverage that later on when we start looking in how can we use that with PowerShell, how can we automate stuff, and whatever it can be, we're always interacting with the Graph API. So I hope that makes sense. So what is the Graph API? Well, the Graph API is just a REST API with endpoints. It's the way Microsoft built up their entire cloud stuff when we talk Azure AD and devices and all the other services running in the cloud from Microsoft right now is based on the REST API that they call Microsoft Graph API. And when we are interacting with the Graph API, we have a different methods. And these are the methods that are always being used. We have the get, and get is just we are retrieving data in some way. Maybe we want to look at the data, but we are getting the data. We have post if we want to add data back into Graph. That could be, for example, if you're creating a new device compliance policy within Intune. When you go through the wizard and you click on everything and then you click save, it will actually do a post method back to Graph, telling Graph that here we want to create this data. So we are creating our device compliance. Then we have put. Put is a method that we can do to assign data to different objects within Graph. And there are different scenarios where that's being used. We also have patch if we want to update something already existing. So we might not want to do a full post to create something new, but we already have something. And then we do a patch to just update the data that's already in there. And then, of course, we have the delete if we want to remove data. So this is just the methods that's being used all the time again, even though if you don't know it, it's always getting used. And a way to figure out what is actually happening when you're going through the console is actually to fire up the developer mode within your browser. So pretty much all the browsers out there have something called developer mode. Within there, you can actually go in and look and see for every click you do within the portal, what kind of request are you sending back to Graph API? And when we have that information, we can start make sense on what is actually going on here. And how can we figure out that if we go into our portal, we do some action, and then we want to replicate that maybe later on in a script or something, or automate some process, we can actually look in here and do the same stuff later on using PowerShell, for example. So that's some of the things I want to show you here. So first of all, I need to fire up this one here. And I'm going to make it a little bit easier to see my screen. So hopefully everyone can see my virtual machine here that I have running. So hopefully everyone is familiar with this page here or the portal here. This is just devicemanagement.microsoft.com, but we could of course also go to portal.azure.com, and from here we can then go into Intune if we want to manage our environment within Intune. But let's stick with the device management console for now. So when we actually go in here, and as I mentioned, we have the F12 feature. So I'm gonna press F12. And I'm running in the Edge browser, the new Edge browser right now. And well, I gotta be honest, I love the new Edge browser. It's so good. It's so much better than the old Edge browser. And when you fire up F12, the developer mode within the browser, you need to click on network. So here you will see a lot of stuff. There's a lot of stuff in here you can ignore, but whenever you do something within the portal now, we can actually track and see what is going on. So let's try this one out. So if I go to devices, you can see it's starting popping up a lot of stuff here. So this is just all the calls that goes back to Graph API to grab data for you. So all the information I can see here in my web browser, that's the information that it had to retrieve from Graph. And then Microsoft is just making it nice and pretty and displaying it to us within the portal. So let's find a VM here. So if I want to go in and look at my machine here, we can actually go down.
Lyden smuttet fra.
No sound.
We don't have any sound. Can you check
Like that?
you?
Yep.
Yes, now we can hear you again.
Now. Okay. How long was I muted?
You were muted for about 30 seconds, 45 maybe.
Oh, okay. Sorry. I don't know what happened there. So, okay, let's roll back a little bit. So for every time you do a click or something within the portal, you are doing a request URL. Well, you're getting a request URL. So this is the information that we are looking for. And then to that, we also have the method that we talked about earlier. So this is telling the Graph API, what are we trying to retrieve? What kind of information are we trying to retrieve? And this is the same thing if I do an action within the console here. If I click sync on this machine, we can see a lot of things here pops up. And you can see here, we have a sync device. So again, within the request URL, I can now see this was the request that was being sent, and it was a post method. So what I can do pretty much is I can take this URL and just create that request again outside of the browser if I would like to. This way I can figure out what are we doing when we're doing something within the portal. So this is great. Let's see here. So the next thing I would like to talk about very briefly here is the Graph Explorer. So within Microsoft Graph, we have something called the Graph Explorer. Here you can go in and play around with Graph if you would like to. You can either do it with data that Microsoft provides for you, so you don't have the chance. You can't really mess something up. So if we go to developer.microsoft.com and then Graph Explorer, you can also Google it. You will get to this page here. And from here, we can start playing around with Graph. And right now, I did a get method and then the URL request that we were talking about. But this is just fake data that Microsoft provides. So here we can get some data back. So in this section here is for me. Me in this case was Megan Bowen, and here is all the information from I think that's from Azure, actually, Azure AD, about the user. But what we also can do is I can sign in with my Microsoft account here. So when I do this, I can authenticate to my tenant. And from here, I can now do the same stuff that I can do otherwise. So I can actually, I should be able to just copy this request URL here, go back to Graph Explorer, copy it in, and we can see it changed. Well, it didn't change, but it should change. So we need to change the method. We need to do a post because that was our old method here. So I need to change that to a post. It automatically changed from the V1 to beta schema because pretty much all the requests within the Intune portal or device management portal is always in the beta. And if I now run the same query here, I'm now executing the same command that I did from the portal by going into the portal and clicking sync. So that was very briefly about the Graph Explorer. I hope that makes sense. Feel free to ask any questions. You can also come off mute maybe later on and we can talk about it. I can't see the chat right now, so just bear with me and I'll try to catch up with all the questions later on. But the next thing we need to talk about is what can we do with PowerShell? So what Microsoft provided us is a PowerShell module. It's called the Intune PowerShell module. And with this module, you get a bunch of commandlets where you can interact with the graph from PowerShell. This is, I would say, the easy way of doing it. You can do a little bit more advanced stuff if you're not using the the module or the SDK, the Intune PowerShell SDK. But this is a great way to get started, at least. And you can find a lot of information if you just Google or Bing it for whatever reason. Intune PowerShell SDK. So here we have it. So Microsoft published everything on GitHub from now on. So here is the content of the Intune PowerShell SDK. You can download it from GitHub if you would like to, but you can also do it directly from PowerShell, and I'm going to show you that in a minute here. But here you have all the information. There's a lot of good documentation on the SDK here that I highly recommend that you take a look at if you're interested in this kind of stuff. But if we jump into PowerShell, I'm going to zoom a little bit also. So the easy way to get started using PowerShell is first, we need to install the module. And this can be done by just running this command here. If you have an older module already installed, you can add the -force, and that means it will go out and download the latest module, and it's going to look at it from from the PowerShell gallery. When you run this command for the first time, you need to accept that you're downloading content from the internet, and there are some other packages that also gets installed during this, but it's all necessary to be able to get the module installed. Once you have the module installed, I already prepped this environment before, so I already have it installed. But then we can take a look at, let's see if we have the module here installed. And yep, we have the Microsoft Graph.Intune module installed. That's good. The next step we can do is we can take a look at what kind of commands do we have within the module. And there's a bunch of them. So from here, this is what I do usually. If I don't know what kind of commandlet I'm gonna use or looking for, I can just open up this out grid view here with the list of all the commandlets, and I can just start typing. I can do, okay, I need to do something with device compliance, for example. Compliance. So now I'm filtering on all the commandlets that has something to do with device compliance. So you can see here we have get Intune device compliance policy. So again, we have a get, meaning we will retrieve data. So this is more in line of the PowerShell standard when it comes to naming convention within commandlets. We can invoke an Intune device compliance assignment if you would like that. We have new -Intune device compliance policy. So that's, for example, if you want to create a new device compliance policy. We have remove Intune device compliance policy. We have update and a bunch of more stuff. So this is the way I usually do it if I'm looking for something, but I'm not 100% sure what it is I'm looking for. And I also want to show you that we have, as I said, we have a bunch of commandlets within this one. The entire module contains 1,569 commandlets. So there's a lot. So once we have the SDK or the module installed, what we need to do is we need to connect. The first thing is always we need to connect to your tenant, because otherwise you're just running the script and PowerShell doesn't know which tenant are you trying to go to. So we need to go do a connect MS graph. And I've just put in the force interactive here. That just means that I'm gonna be prompted for the logon screen if I already have a token. Because what happens is that when you do the connect to MS graph, you retrieve authentication token, and that token is later on used to authenticate you. And that token, if you have the module, it renews every hour, I believe it is. So it will auto renew if you have already signed in. But if I run this command here, you're probably all familiar with this sign in pop-up. So I just need to authenticate to my tenant. And since I've already been signed in, I don't have to put in a username and password. But if I weren't signed in, I would need to enter my username and password to the tenant I would like to connect to. So once I'm connected, I can now start doing stuff with the PowerShell module here. And I also want to mention a little bit about paging, because when we are doing our calls to the Graph API, all the calls has a limit of 1,000 objects, and this is called paging. So if you're trying to retrieve something that has more than 1,000 objects, you need to do something called paging. And if you're using the SDK, it's very simple. In this scenario here, if I run this one here, get Intune managed devices. So this commandlet here will get information about all my managed devices I have in Intune. So we can see here we have a OnePlus phone. That's an Android phone. I have, what's this? It's an Android for work device. I have a Huawei device here, and also a bunch of Windows 10. I have an iPhone. So this is information about all the devices I have in Intune. But let's say you have more than 1,000 objects in Intune. To be able to retrieve that in one go, you need to do something called paging. And that's just simply by adding, if you pipe your get Intune device, well-managed device into get msgraph all pages, that means that you will get all that information. So that's just a good thing to remember if you're doing something with more than 1,000 objects coming back to you. We have the custom app. We might be able to talk about that a little bit later. But let's come back to what we did within the portal before. So what I did here, I went in and I clicked sync on a device, and again the portal interacted with Graph and made the sync happen. We did the same thing within Graph Explorer. We were able to grab the URL request, we grabbed the method, and then we ran the query, and we did the same thing. So how could we do the same thing but from PowerShell? So in this example here, I'm actually gonna send a sync to all my devices, and this is actually from a customer case that we were working on a while ago, where they actually had a problem. I believe it was iOS devices, and there was something with a configuration policy that was messing stuff up. And what we found out was the solution was actually to update the configuration policy and then make sure that the device talked back with Intune and made a sync. So when you have an iOS device, by default, if it's already been enrolled for a while, it will do a sync to Intune every 8 hours. But in this scenario, we couldn't wait for 8 hours. And this was also, I think it was thousands of iOS devices. So waiting 8 hours, depending on when the device last talked to Intune, was, well, yeah, we couldn't do that. So what options did we have? Well, one option was go into the portal and find every single device and go in and click sync. But for hundreds or thousands devices, that's not, it's not reasonable. You can't do that. So an easy way to do this was just using the Intune PowerShell SDK. And so here at first, we're just going to connect to msgraph. We always need to do that, but I'm already connected now, and the token will auto refresh every hour now. So I don't have to think about that. But what I would like to do here is I'm going to try to get into managed devices, and I'm also adding a filter here to contains operating system iOS. So this means that I will get all my devices that are iOS devices within this variable here called devices. And there shouldn't be many here because I'm in my test environment. But if we look into the variable now, we can see here's an iPhone SE. So again, imagine that we had maybe 200 devices here in this variable right now. So what we can do then is for each device within the devices variable, we can do invoke into manage device sync and just run this here. And we will now start syncing for every device within that within the variable. So I know Microsoft also started adding features for bulk actions within the device management console. Let's see, I think we can look at it here. If I can remember where it was. There was some place where we got bulk action. I can't remember where it was, but regardless, it doesn't matter. But for some reason, sync wasn't a part of that. You could wipe devices, you can reset devices in a bulk action command, but you for some reason you couldn't do sync. And we can do the same thing again for all our Windows devices. If I just filter on Windows devices, I can then do an invoke into manage device sync for each object and run that, and it will start syncing. We'll send a sync request to all of devices. And of course, the devices needs to be online. They have to have internet connection, otherwise this won't work. But at least we are doing what we can do is to send a sync request to tell the device to start syncing. So this was very, very basic. For what are we actually trying to solve here? So the way I see it with PowerShell is that I would like to make my job easier. I'm pretty lazy. I don't like doing manual stuff twice. If I've done it once, I don't want to do it twice. Then I want to automate it. And there's also some stuff within Intune and Azure AD that's not easy to do right now. Good thing is Microsoft is always improving on stuff, but there's always something I figure out that there needs to be an easier way to do this and do it in a manual way. And so it's all about solving problems for me while I'm waiting for Microsoft to try to implement that. Microsoft, of course, has limited resources. They can't do everything, and they have to take a lot of things in consideration. But me as an administrator, I need to be able to solve my own problems as well. And that's where PowerShell now helps a lot within that. So one of the biggest problems I've had was actually when we were doing deployments within Intune or Azure AD, when we assign policies, when we assign applications to groups and stuff like that, one of the biggest headaches has always for me been, but how do I know which, if you have hundreds of apps, hundreds of configurations, isn't there an easy way to see which group stuff has been applied to? Because right now, I need to go into every app, every policy, and check where has it been assigned to. Is it required? Yeah, I put it to required, so all Windows devices. I have available for enrolled devices with all users. And I need to figure this one out. But isn't there an easier way to do it? And from the portal, no. Sorry, there isn't. So then again, I sat down and I started working on a script to be able to figure out what kind of stuff is assigned to a specific Azure AD group. So I won't talk in depth about the script because I only have a few minutes left here, but I just want to show you that this is all about trying to solve problems. So what this script here does, and this is also available on my website, timmyit.com. All the scripts I've been talking about so far is available on my website, and also feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions about that. But what we are doing here is we are connecting to MS Graph using PowerShell. We are defining what group.
Okay, Timmy.
Oh, I got muted. Yep.
Yes. Good.
I'm back. I don't know why I got auto muted. It seems like I'm getting auto muted for some reason. Where was I? So yeah, we're just looking at the group, and if we run this script here, I can then, let's just do this. Oh, of course it didn't work for some reason, but you get the theory here. So what I'm actually doing is I'm trying to look for a specific group in Azure AD and then figure out what's been assigned to this group. So right now it found 0 apps assigned to the group, but they found 2 device compliance policies. And here I see the name of the device compliance policy that's been assigned to this group. And I also see there's 2 device configurations found to this group. So this makes it a lot easier when I'm trying to figure out, okay, what's been assigned to this group in Azure AD and what hasn't been assigned to this group in Azure AD. And you can, of course, do this towards all groups in Azure AD as well. But I'm not going to run this now because it's not going to take a while because it needs to loop through all the groups I have in Azure AD. But yeah, and this script is also available again on my blog, timmyit.com, if you're interested in this kind of stuff, and a bunch of other scripts as well. And that's about it. I think we need to go into Q&A. I haven't been able to look at the chat in the time I was here. So let's go through the chat and see if we have any questions.
I haven't seen any questions, Timmy. So
okay.
If you have more content, I think you are welcome to continue.
Yeah, we can continue.
You have another 10 minutes or so.
Okay, awesome. Thank you, Ronnie. So yes, we talked about this script to make sure that, well, to check if we have any policies assigned to a group. Another thing that also been, well, I see this come out a lot, definitely in different forums and different channels on the internet here, and it's talking about Autopilot and especially group tags. So for you guys out there who's working with Autopilot today, let's see here, devices, Windows enrollment. So what I'm talking about right here is when we go into Autopilot, we have something called group tags, and the group tags is usually a way to filter out and assign machines to different profiles. So usually what's being done is that you tag your devices with a group tag, and based on the group tag, then you assign that within a dynamic group in Azure AD. And to that group, you then assign a profile, an Autopilot profile. And it was very recently, Microsoft added a capability to go in and actually change the group tag from the UI. Previous to this, we could only add a group tag when adding a device into Autopilot. But now we have the option to actually change the group tag from the portal, which is great, and Graph API, which we love. But again, if you want to automate this, maybe you have a set of computers that you know will always have a different group tag. We can automate this using PowerShell. So just to show you a short example on that is here again in this script here, we are connecting to Graph. We always need to connect to Graph, but I'm already connected, so I don't have to think about that. Then I need to figure out what resources do I need to use. And this is because within the SDK, the SDK is actually auto-generated. And it's auto-generated in a point of time. So anything that Microsoft adds to Graph and Intune in general, after that period from it's been generated, we are missing out on right now. So we don't have a commandlet for that. However, within the SDK, we have something called invoke MS Graph request. And if we're using this commandlet, we can actually do the same stuff again, but with a different commandlet. And let me explain a little bit more about that. Because when, as I mentioned before, we can go in and we can find the request URL. And if we find the request URL, we can understand what is being used by Graph to perform this action that we want to do. So if we do F12 again, so if I go in here and I would like to change the group tag, I can set SCUGDK and I click save. Again, I will be able to see and look at the request URL to figure out what's being done. So by grabbing this URL here, I can see it's window autopilot device identity. Okay, good. And it's also then doing an update device properties. And it's doing a post. So what I'm doing within my script is I'm grabbing the resource, which is device management, Windows autopilot device identities. I'm pointing to the beta because pretty much everything in Intune is pointed to the beta schema. I need to figure out what's the JSON object being used, because when we are sending data back to Graph, it's being also used as a JSON object. I don't think I mentioned that earlier, but I just pointing to I'm just creating a new group tag that is SCUGDK rocks, and then I'm creating a JSON object. And if I jump back here, within the request URL and the request method, at the bottom here, we have the payload. And the payload is the JSON object that's got sent back to Graph to update. So we can see, as long as I follow this standard here and put it in as a JSON object, I can then send it back with PowerShell. So I'm creating a JSON object with the group tag property, and then I'm adding a variable, new group tag. And then once I've defined all of that, I can do something like this. It's a little bit quick and dirty, but let's grab all of our stuff. So now we have all our autopilot here, and then I can search for a serial number. So this is just the serial number within Autopilot. So I'm just filtering or finding the object which has the serial number. So we can do this. Then I'm defining the group tag. I'm just doing it twice here just because I wanted to talk about it. And then I can do the invoke MS Graph request and point to my JSON. Let's see, JSON name. Yeah, that's good. So in theory, this should work. Content is null or empty. Okay. Try this again. Okay, for some reason it doesn't work right now. That's, of course, the demo gods is not with me today, but trust me, it works. When you figure out exactly what you wanted to do, it works perfectly. And what we also can do is then we can maybe, based on the module, I had one customer asking for that. We want all these specific modules, models that we're ordering. I think it was Lenovo devices, but it doesn't matter if it is Lenovo, Dell, whatever. all these specific devices should always have this group tag. So what you can do is just create a PowerShell script that gets all the objects, filter it on model, and just assign the group tag to those objects. So this is a great way to just making your life a little bit easier in that sense. And we are about to run out of time here, but before we end, I just also want to mention that right now I'm running everything as my user, but you can also set it up in running it in Azure Automation, also using the SDK. So if you're familiar with Azure Automation and runbooks in general, what you can do is you can create a new runbook and do your PowerShell stuff. And you actually in modules, in this specific account here, I actually added the Microsoft Graph Intune, and it's available in the modules gallery. So you can just go in there and search and add the Graph Intune SDK. And from here, you can then create your runbook and do a PowerShell script to whatever it is you would like to do on a schedule. So in this instance here, I'm just sending a device notification to, I think this is all my iOS devices, on a schedule. So I think it's every Friday now. I'm sending out a message that says SCUGDK is on fire. It's getting hot in here, and all my users will get this notification. So doing it like this is very helpful if you're doing it. If you're just administrating your day-to-day tasks, you can do that. But if you want to set up more automation in the backend, you can also do that using the Graph, the Intune PowerShell SDK, and adding it into your Azure Automation.